Welcome to In the Funnel. My name is Mark Cox. In the Funnel is a group of sales coaches and consultants that help B2B sales teams dramatically improve revenue. Clients come to us when revenue growth is stagnated, or their sales team is not meeting expectations, or they need to recalibrate their sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. Our clients have enjoyed tremendous success working within the funnel, and please hear it straight from them by listening to the testimonial section of this website. What they'll tell you is there's two things that make us unique and different in our space. Number one, we have a process and a methodology. First, for understanding your current state, and then second, for building your sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. The second thing that makes us unique and different is that everybody within the funnel has run a material sales organization in their recent past. We're all practitioners. We don't have any theorists or teachers, and what that means is we can get in front of your sales team and run the next sales meeting, or join them on their next sales call to close your next large prospect. All of us have a passion for professional, disciplined, process-driven sales, and we'd be delighted to talk to you if you're looking to grow revenue for your company. Please feel free to reach out to us through this website at info@inthefunnel.com or by telephone. Thanks for taking the time to watch this.
It was one of the most important life lessons that I have carried with me every day at work, which is, you know what, just be ready. Even if it's not your job and you're in a meeting, it's happened to me dozens and dozens of times where I've been in maybe a high profile meeting, maybe I have a formal assignment there, but somewhere in that meeting, we're off script and someone says, "Hey, Liz, can you give us a report of how, our rollout of Oracle, version 8 is going in Europe?" I'm like, wow, that wasn't on the agenda. No one told me to come prepared. But I'm like, you know what? You just show up knowing you could be put into the game at any moment, and you should be paying attention to the conversation. You should come prepared. You should be ready. You should be game ready.
Hey team, we've got a spectacular show for you today because we've got Liz Wiseman, who's the author of Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter. And I read Multipliers about 10 years ago, and as a leader, it really changed my approach. Every meeting since then, I think, where I have my team in a meeting, I walk in thinking, am I going to be a multiplier in this meeting, or am I going to be a diminisher? And of course, Multipliers explained a lot of detail on both and how you become that multiplier who multiplies the intelligence and capabilities of everybody around you as a leader. Today, we're going to be talking about Liz's next book or recent book, Impact Players: How to Take the Lead, Play Bigger, and Multiply Your Impact. And it's really talking about how that person in the room becomes the player, the go-to person who's going to get the result we need. And what I find is so interesting about this is we all know the impact players on our teams. When something is really important, these are the people we go to get help or support, or we give them those projects that are most meaningful. But what this book explains to us is why it defines that impact player, that person who's really going to come through for us. And it contrasts them not against the bottom 30% of your workforce, but it actually contrasts them against really solid players, contributors who are good workers, who do good work. They're not impact players, but they're solid performers. And I think that's where this gets interesting. How do I go from being that solid performer to that impact player? And in our conversation today, by the way, Liz and I talk about the 5 practices of impact players as contrasted with those people who are just good contributors. And a good contributor does their job, but an impact player does the job that's needed. A good contributor waits for direction, whereas an impact player steps up and takes a hold of something and then will step back as needed. A contributor escalates issues. An impact player finishes stronger and just takes control of something. A good contributor sticks to what they know best, but an impact player jumps into things and asks and adjusts. Finally, contributors tend to add to the burden of their managers because of those other things I mentioned. And impact players, they make work light, the people you want to be around. There's obviously so much more in behind all of this, and we get into this in today's discussion, Liz and I. It's a fantastic conversation. And as you know, Liz is a researcher and an executive advisor, and she really teaches leadership around the world. She's the CEO of the Wiseman Group, which is a leadership research and development firm helping people transform their organizations by maximizing impact and multiplying intelligence. Man, I love that. Multipliers, of course, was a Wall Street Journal bestseller. And Impact Players is a New York Times bestseller already. Spectacular book. I really enjoyed the conversation today. I think you will too. Here's Liz Wiseman. Hey, Liz, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Mark. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, me too. And I'm going to call it out. So we're going to be talking about impact players today, but I got to say Multipliers really changed my management approach back in 2010. I know it was 2010. I probably read it in 2012. But those of you on the podcast, if you haven't read Multipliers and you're in charge of people, you absolutely have to read Multipliers. And one of the things, Liz, I always find it's front of mind, even now with what we do within the funnel. I rarely get through a week where I don't take a pause before a meeting and say, listen, am I going to be a multiplier in this meeting or am I going to be a diminisher? When I have all these teams, it was so simple and helpful to think of things in those terms. But the book we're going to be talking about today, your latest book, Impact Players, How to Take the Lead, Play Bigger, and Multiply Your Impact. So let's just start with what drove you. I know you had rookie smarts in there too, but what drove you to do the research and focus in on impact players?
Well, Oracle's president, Ray Lane, he once called me a dog on a bone.
Nicely.
I don't know if it was nicely. I mean, he meant it very, very specifically. He's like, Liz, you are the most tenacious person I know. And I am a dog on a bone. And, the books, they're not me trying to figure out, where's there like a need in the market and how do I fulfill that need and what would be a successful book? I just get locked on to these questions I don't have answers to and I can't find answers to. And I go and try to research and study until I can find answers for myself and for, managers, leaders, striving professionals at large. And really it was, wait a minute, I've been spending a decade trying to understand what the best leaders do that allow people to contribute at their fullest. But that's not the whole story. There's a whole other story around what the best contributors do. And yeah, sure, it's easy to contribute and play big and be at your best and make an impact when you've got a great leader. But what if you don't? Or what happens when you bring kind of multiplier leadership together with what I call impact players? And really, that's what I was trying to understand is what are the mindsets and practices of people who play big? And I'm trying to understand, why is it in a room full of equally smart, hardworking, talented people, why are some people kind of going through the motions and other people are breaking through and making a big impact and delivering work that is extraordinarily valuable? Like, what is the difference in mindset and work practice, not talent and intelligence?
Well, it's so interesting. I mean, I'm an internal optimist, and I really do believe that the vast majority of everybody who goes to work actually wants to make a meaningful impact. They want to perform well. They actually want to play at the highest level. But one of the things I like so much about the book is you really get into defining through research and feedback, and we'll talk about that in a sec. What does that actually mean? And I know you like your sports analogies. We love them here, and we're north of the border, Liz. So, everybody here had to play hockey. I don't think I had an option. Yeah, you had to play
Is it
high level.
required for like continued citizenship
It
in
really is. I got to
Canada?
keep playing too. And apparently I got to fight somebody once every 3 weeks on the ice or I'm not Canadian. But there were, as you went through those journeys, there was always those tense times during any sporting event. And at some point in time, there's a go-to team who goes on the ice or they go on the pitch or they go on the field.
Mhm.
And it isn't always the fastest or the strongest player who's out there at that point in time. It's somebody who just has a knack for coming through.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
I
I
think,
love this term you used, coming through. It's people who will come through in the clutch. And one of the things I love to watch in sporting events is I'm fascinated by the sidelines.
oh yeah.
Oh,
Why
and
is that?
I watch. I mean, I can't help but watch coaches' behavior. Like I
Mm,
can't tell. I've watched hundreds and hundreds of my own kids' games and other sporting events, and I can't always tell you what happened on the field, but I can tell you a lot about the behavior of the coaches. And I'm fascinated by the behavior of the players when they're off the pitch.
ah,
How do they hold themselves? Like the footballers, do they keep their helmets on? Are they game ready? Are they screwing around with the other folks, or are they watching what's happening on the field? Are they ready to go in a moment's notice? Like you always see, like when the coach says, "Okay, hey, Marcus, you," and they're like, what? Versus the kid who's like, "Okay, I know exactly what's happening, and if I go in, I'm ready, and I'm going to come through."
mm.
These
Well,
players hold themselves differently when they're off field.
makes it easy for the coach to pick them, to throw them in.
Yeah, and I love that framing, because in some ways that is what the impact players are. They are people who make it easy for the coach to put in when it matters.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that goes into being the easy pick.
Well, and that's what we're going to talk about here a little bit. It's funny with that sports analogy. So when I grew up playing hockey, I was a goalie and in hockey. And so, and sometimes you're playing, sometimes you're on the bench. And when you're on the bench, you're in a freezing cold rink and you're crammed into a bench. And heaven forbid the guy on the ice doesn't play well. I'm getting tapped on the shoulder after having sat there for 180 minutes.
Truly
And
cold.
truly cold. Even when you're young, that matters more now. But even when you were young and playing, like walking on, and there's no warm up, there's no stress. You just got to go. And so we always used to have a bit of a mental exercise for whoever wasn't playing goal, that you actually had a pad and paper in front of you and you recorded where every shot had been taken from. You had a little diagram of a rink.
So
And
you're like a little data science at work there.
but now I got to be in the game. So now I can't be off looking in the fan and the stands. I can't be looking for my girlfriend in the stands, my parents, whatever else. I got to be in the game. And
Yeah.
that way, heaven forbid, if something happened, he got injured, I get tapped, I'm stepping on, and 14 seconds later, somebody's shooting a puck 75 miles an hour at my throat. I better be awake.
So Mark, I have to tell you this experience. I did not include it in the book. But I had this experience when I was probably 20, maybe 21 years old, and I'm doing an internship. I'm in college. I'm doing an internship for my father,
Okay.
with my father, and he is a commercial real estate salesman. And we are going door to door in a little industrial park, and we're, knocking on doors, seeing if any
Hard.
of these little shop owners, business owners are looking to expand their space. And so I'm just tagging along with my dad. And, I'm like just there. I don't know if I'm arm candy to, my dad. I'm not a real estate salesman. I'm just there to learn, I suppose. And, we knock on like a couple doors and my dad kind of does this little spiel. And then we go to knock on the third one and he knocks and then he turns to me and he said, "This one's yours."
Holy smokes.
And I'm like, "What?"
Holy smokes.
And he wasn't kidding. And, my dad had this sort of interesting way of teaching his children life lessons or what have you. He was kind of a bit of a brute this way, but the person answers the door and And I'm like, okay, hi, I'm Liz, this is Jay, and I kind of go through this little pitch and we get done. And I'm like, oh, and it was one of the most important life lessons that I have carried with me every day at work, which is, just be ready. Even if it's
Mm,
not your job and you're in a meeting, it's happened to me dozens and dozens of times where I've been in maybe a high profile meeting, maybe I have a formal assignment there, but somewhere in that meeting, we're off script and someone says, hey, Liz, can you give us a report of how, our rollout of Oracle, version 8 is going in Europe? I'm like, wow, that wasn't on the agenda. No one told me to come prepared. But I'm like, you know what? You just show up knowing you could be put into the game at any moment and you should be paying attention to the conversation. You should come prepared.
what a
You
great
should be
tip.
ready. You should be game ready
What a
all the
great,
time.
great tip. Absolutely great tip. And by the way, love your dad. I know he did multiple things as an entrepreneur, one of which was be a donut maker.
He
So I
was
think I think I would have enjoyed growing up in that household. But maybe let's start, Liz. One of the other things I love so much about impact players was that there's a lot of work and research done from spectacular performers versus the bottom 10%.
mm,
And I think all of us roll around kind of understanding what that gap looks like. But what I thought was really great about impact players was saying, hey, there's an impact player out there, and then there's a whole lot of other great good contributors who are solid players, but there's a difference because when push comes to shove, who are we going to tap on the bench to step in? And just from a definition perspective for those out there, high impact, we talked about high impact contributors, those who are doing the work of exceptional value and impact. And then typical contributors we defined as smart, talented people who are doing solid, bracket if not great work, but they're solid. These
mhm.
aren't folks on the bottom end of the trajectory that we're trying to move out, but there is a
Rock solid
difference.
people.
Rock solid. And so when you started to pursue the topic, tell us a little bit about that research and the investigation with the managers, et cetera.
Mm. Well, I'm trying to understand what are the nuances between good and great, or even kind of great and really extraordinary and high impact. And I want to know what are the small differences
Mm-hmm.
in how they think and work that end up creating this like huge difference in impact. Like anyone can discern top performers and bottom performers. That's easy. We've got a
Right.
lot of help on that. And so I'm trying to see this nuance. And here's probably the most important idea that came out of this research for me was these these typical contributors were stellar. Let me just describe in aggregate what managers said about them. So the essence of the research is we went out to 9 top employers and asked 170 managers across those 9 companies to
Okay.
identify 2 types of contributors. One that we ended up calling an impact player, one that we called ordinary contributor, both smart, both hardworking, both talented. One is doing well, one is making a huge impact.
Mm-hmm.
And here's how the managers describe the rock solid contributors, because they didn't describe lackeys, mediocre
Oh, no,
people.
right.
These were people who did their job brilliantly. Well, like they were doing well, they did their job, they followed direction, they took responsibility, they took ownership for things, they were focused, they carried their weight on teams. And as I looked at this profile, I thought, well, these are stellar. Looks like a hiring profile.
Right.
But here's the important point is they were absolutely stellar in ordinary times. But once the environment got chaotic, once things became uncertain, once there's ambiguity, a lot of change, what maybe some people might call a VUCA environment, these rock solid contributors, in some ways, they were like rocks, like strong and steady, but immovable.
Mm.
And when there was a lot of uncertainty, this is where the rock solid contributors fell short and the impact players excelled. And there were these 5 situations. I kind of stepped back and looked at all the behavioral differences and the situations in which they they excelled. I'm like, oh, there were 5 kind of clusters of these: messy problems, unclear roles, unforeseen obstacles, moving targets, unrelenting demands. I'm like, this is like the new reality of work.
No kidding.
These are the everyday challenges of the modern workplace. And these are the places that impact players think and work very differently than others.
And you're exactly right. I mean, we have dozens of clients that we consult with or we do training for. And they're typically mid-sized organizations in technology or larger organizations in manufacturing or services businesses. They're all going through all 5 of those things all the time. Messy problems, unclear roles, unforeseen circumstances or obstacles, of course, moving targets, no kidding, high COVID, unrelenting demands. I think, by the way, I loved somewhere in the book, we had the research on Harvard's research on how much time an executive is spending working these days. I think it came to something like 72 hours. But these unrelenting demands, many of us have been doing this for a long time, have felt this for a very, very long time. And the other thing, by the way, I'm quite sure, Liz, everybody listening to this, they know who these impact players are on their teams. Something happens and I need a little SWAT team. Who are the 2 or 3 people I'm going to immediately? Mm-hmm. But what I really loved about the book is it actually defines some of these things. So defines all these things based on the research. So first of all, I think for the leaders, they can figure out, okay, why is it I like these folks so much? But also for the gazillions of people who really want to make a contribution at work. And sometimes they're not clear as to what the difference is. They're wondering, why didn't I get tapped on the shoulder for that kind of unique project? So let's talk a little bit about what is it that the impact players start to do at the highest level, that everybody else isn't doing. And you've identified a few things here. They do the job that's needed. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting one. I love your example. Step up, then step back. They finish stronger. They ask and adjust. And as we talked when we were, prepping this podcast today, they make work light. And for me, again, your book's so spot on, but after 20 years of managing people, I always had those one-on-ones with folks in the sales organization. And there were folks I was just dying to have the one-on-one with. And there's always those one-on-ones I didn't feel like stepping into, or I needed a lot more energy. I had to be pretty well fed and caffeinated.
You brace yourself. You go in with some sort of like body armor because you're like, oh, it's just going to be hard. I need to take a Gatorade or something into this. Like, it's going to be rough. It's going to be hard. It's a drain on my time. Mm-hmm. Whereas those, you see these people's names on your calendar, the impact players, and you're like, best thing's going to happen in my day is meeting with this person.
Exactly. So you had 17 years at Oracle. By the way, great for this podcast, by the way, one of the most aggressive sales organizations in the world during the time you were there for sure. Absolutely. That whole industry of enterprise software is a great topic for a different time. But let's start with the do the job that's needed, because you've got a great story, showcasing this for you. This is very personal to you.
Oh, it is. Yeah. We found the differences when problems are messy, and they're not messy problems in my mind are problems that aren't owned by any one person. Mm-hmm. They're scattered problems. They sit they sit in the white space on org charts. And we find that the ordinary contributor, they do their part, they do their job. They take their part of it, versus the impact player that leaves the comfortable confines of their job description, their position, and they go and do the job that needs to be done.
Right.
They're rangy this way. And it's not that they abandon their post and go do glamour work. It's like their job description is a starting place, not an ending place. This, for me, was a learned orientation. I did not come into Oracle with this orientation. I came into this probably with a bit of what I think a lot of the Gen Z are coming into the workplace. Like, hey, here's what I want to do. Here's what I'm passionate about. Like, who will give me a job that I'm passionate about? Like, I'm looking for an outlet for my passion. I
Mm-hmm.
came into Oracle wanting to teach leadership, which,
Right.
interestingly is what I do today, a whole lot better because they didn't let me do it right away. So I came in sort of gunning to like find an opportunity to build some management training, teach some management training. I'm a year into the company. Oracle's a really young, rapidly growing
Nice
software
timing, by
company.
the way. Your timing of being at Oracle was fantastic.
And it was lucky. I was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And, really my big contribution to that was I said yes to the opportunity.
Yeah.
And I'm, at this time, Oracle is gobbling up all of the top technical talent in the United States. And, we are going to 17 of the top universities, taking the top programmers coming out of their CS and EE programs. We're hiring them by the thousands. And I've worked in the company for a year, and there's this opportunity to transfer to this kind of new department. It's the internal training department. Uh, they run the technical boot camp. So when we hire all these new college graduates, we're putting them through this 3-week welcome to Oracle. Here's our technology boot camp. Well, I go and interview with this group, and I interview with the manager, the director, and I'm interviewing with the vice president, and I'm answering his questions. And then it's kind of my turn to sort of take charge of the interview. And so I seized the opportunity to tell Bob, I think Oracle's got a real management problem here, and that we've got a lot of young technologists being thrown into management with no management experience, no management training. They're wreaking havoc on the company. Now, Mark, this is something everyone can see and everyone knows about. And Bob agrees, like, this is a problem. And I'm like, so then I kind of assert myself and say, Oracle needs a management boot camp, and I would love to build that. And it's Bob's response that like created this deep impression in me, because what he said was, Liz, that's great. We think you're great. We'd love to have you on this team, but your boss has a different problem.
Mm.
She's got to figure out how to get 2,000 new college graduates up to speed in Oracle technology over the next year. And what would be great is if you could help her solve that problem. And I knew they needed technical instructors, and I wanted to teach, but not technology. I want to teach leadership. And now Bob wants me to teach programming to a bunch of nerds.
Mm.
And I mean, it's nothing. I have no passion for like the virtues of database indexing techniques and, the
Right.
intricacies of correlated subqueries. It's not the job I wanted, but I could tell it was the job that was needed. And I could see, like, there was just this kernel of wisdom in me that I could see, like, what Bob is saying to you, Liz, is, hey, look around, make yourself useful, like, figure out what needs to get done, and then go work on what's important.
But that's so scary, Liz. Like if I was to put myself in your shoes at that point in time, you're a new grad, came out of Brigham Young, great school.
Yeah.
But
And out of business school.
Yeah. But you're teaching technical training to some of the best technical minds in college and university coming into one of the best technical companies. That's not your core competency. And I think there's a lot of people that would have been terrified by that, because there's a fear of failure, particularly for someone new starting their career in the early days, where you're going, hey, I know I could kill it if I was doing leadership training, but I'm trying to train geeks on doing Sorry, everybody, by the way, we work with a lot of technical companies. I'm a geek too. But I'm going to try and train geeks on something they're all geniuses at.
And these are the top of the top of the top in the field. Yeah, I'm like, I'm going to be teaching programming to a bunch of hotshot programmers from MIT and Caltech. But I mean, what I was going to be teaching them was Oracle technology, which, was at that time, it wasn't something they taught in college. This would have been new to them. I was dumb enough in this that I didn't know what I was doing, but I was smart enough to partner up with someone who understood the technology really well. And, this is Leslie Stern. She had a proper CS degree coming out of the great school, UC Berkeley. And and she didn't know how to teach. I knew how to teach. She knew how to program. And I remember she's like, Liz, we got to teach you to think like a programmer. And she's like, you got to take one variable and like, I just learned, and I don't know what it was. I think if I've done anything, all the exciting, interesting, rewarding things I've done in my career have all been what I call naive yeses.
They've been which?
Well, in my mind, here's what a naive yes is. It is okay. Well, let's start with what it's not. It's not say yes to everything.
Okay.
It's not overloading yourself.
Yeah.
It's when somebody asks you to do something hard that you don't know how to do, you say yes to the opportunity before your brain kicks in and tells you can't do it.
Yeah.
So I don't spend a lot of time overthinking, have I done this before? I just say yes. Like, okay, if that's where the action is, the answer is yes. And then I'll figure out how to do this. And I do think it's kind of part of like how you end up doing high impact work. And I think all great salespeople and account execs do this, where a customer has a need and you've got something remotely. I mean, it's how Oracle was built. Customer has a need and you've got something kind of remotely in that, and you say, yes, we can do that. And then you go figure out how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and certainly from my own personal experience, I actually think there's an inner strength, required to do that. I think you need that growth mindset, the Carol Dweck, and you can't have this overwhelming fear of failure, which I think used to drive a lot of young folks. I don't know about the millennials now, but it used to say, and certainly went through my mind a lot, which was when something was presented to me, I'd think about, can I knock the ball out of the park on this thing? Because, I grew up in sales. So what's on the scoreboard matters most. So it doesn't just matter, it actually matters most. And so I think now it's different at a different stage of my career. Now it's, hey, I love these new challenges, and it's going to seem messy and bumpy. And we may not understand our roles, all of us, but we're going to figure out how to work through this together. But it would have taken a lot of courage at a place like Oracle back in the day to jump in there.
So, but here's what I think is important for people who are early in their career. And I'll borrow a sports metaphor, is to develop, let's call it 3, because you can sort of draw a line through 3 data points, to develop 3 data points of naive yeses and successes. So all you need is to know, have I done something? Have I learned to do something that I didn't know how to do before? Did I get good at something I wasn't yet good at? And if you do that 2 or 3 times, then you just go, oh, I have muscle memory on this. Like, I have muscle memory that tells me I can get smart on something fast. That, yeah, those other people learned to program at Caltech or MIT, but I could learn some of those same principles as well. Like, why wouldn't that same kind of learning be available to me in a different location? But it's about going back to, have I done hard things before? When was the last time I did something hard? Oh yeah, that worked out well. That was kind of fun. Build the muscle memory and then just draw upon it. And you'll go, oh yeah, I know what to do.
Well, I think that's great coaching and counsel for all of us at any stage of our career, all of us lifelong learners. But for the gang on the podcast today, there was a nice summary list of some of the main things that help differentiate contributors from impact players. And that first one was do the job that's needed. That's what impact players do. They do the job that's needed instead of just doing their job.
Or the job they want, which was my case. Yeah, it's learning to play where you're needed.
Play where you need it. By the way, we won't do too many sports analogies, but there is also that everybody's seen in every movie ever made on sports. At some point in time, when your team is having a tough time, the coach comes in and just makes it very clear, said, if you want to stand out, go make a play. And it doesn't have to be any clearer than that. Make something good happen.
Yeah.
So for whoever you are and whatever role you're in, make something good happen that can maybe change the momentum in a game or change the outcome of a game. So the second thing we talk about in the book, you talk about in the book, I'm already I'm taking writing credit for the book already. That didn't take long. Step up, then step back. Step up, and then step back. Let's talk a little bit about that, Liz.
Yeah, this is what we find impact players do when the roles are unclear. That the ordinary contributor is a willing leader. Like they're willing to lead a project, a team, a meeting, but they're waiting for somebody to put them in charge. To say, Mark, you're the boss of this. Hey, would you lead this meeting? Whereas the impact player, they are, I don't know if I would say they're on the lookout for, but when they spot a leadership vacuum, an initiative that needs a leader, just a meeting that needs someone to take charge and facilitate it on behalf of the group, they quickly take charge. They quickly step up and lead. But they're not just take charge, lead. I have to be the captain. I have to be the boss all the time. They're people who step in and lead, but when their service is done, when the need is met, when the project is over, they step back and they follow others. They're the kind of people who can go into a meeting at 2:00 and absolutely be the boss. Take charge. Okay, here's what we're doing. I need you to do this. Who's going to, and then they can walk down the hallway and the 3:00 meeting, they're following, they're listening. Maybe they're following under the direction of one of their peers or someone who works for them, that they can move fluidly between these roles, which what that does is it shares leadership. And think about it. Think about the leaders who are always take charge, need to be the boss leaders. They're leaders we follow once or twice, but I think we come to mistrust them. Like, why do you always have to be the boss? Like, what are you afraid is going to happen if you're not calling the shots? But leaders who can aggressively take charge, but also like aggressively follow others, are people that we trust, like will follow anywhere. And it allows the burden to be shared. It keeps organizations from overtaxing some people, which leads to burnout.
Right.
And it keeps organizations from underutilizing others, which also leads to burnout.
To me, it seems to play into your first book too with multipliers. If I'm walking into every meeting with a CEO and they're driving every discussion and leading every discussion, if I'm an executive, I am going to tire of that at some point in time. I don't want to be told what to do.
Yeah.
Put
me in, coach. I want a chance.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. I've got an idea. I'll go make a play. So I think over time, no matter what happens, the organization, as you point out so aptly in Multipliers, all you're doing is training people to ask for direction all the time.
Yeah.
And you're diminishing their intelligence, and they won't stay. The impact players will not stay in that environment. They want to be, they want to step in and make an impact. So let's talk about number 3. And this aligns with the chapters in the book, by the way, 2 through 6. Finish stronger.
This is about what the impact players do when something unreasonable drops in their path, something unprecedented, unwelcomed, uninvited. It's what do you do when something unforeseen happens that is bigger than you, out of your control? And what we find the ordinary contributor tends to do is they tend to escalate up. They recognize, I don't have control over this. Let me bump this to someone who's bigger than me, who has more power, more authority, more budget, whatever it is. And, they sound the alarm or they bump that up, which, it makes sense. It's like getting the obstacle in the hands of someone who can do something about it. What we find the impact players is they just hold on to that ownership. They don't transfer ownership. Now, they don't necessarily go it alone. But this I think is very much like what a great account executive does, which is, okay, we've now got a big problem. they don't hand it off to their sales execs. They don't hand it over to product development to solve. They stay in the lead, but they're like, okay, guys, I need you working for me right now.
Right.
Like, hey, the customer needs to talk to someone high up in sales. Can we talk to you? We need to get like the chief technology officer in on this. Can I get you into this meeting? And they're coordinating that emergency response.
Right.
And they're finishers. They have this completion gene. They get it done, all the way done. And there's something that sort of magical that happens when you're known for always getting it done, is that people give you important work to get done. And you get this kind of performance guarantee, almost like a halo around you that says, oh, when you give it to Mark, it's as good as done. NASA has a term for this. I love it. They call it fire and forget. Which you might think is like fire people and forget about them. It's not. It's, you can fire off a request to these kind of people and forget about it because you know it got across the finish line. And I was writing the chapter, I was calling it Finish Strong, kind of a well-known saying. And I realized it's not finish strong, it's finish stronger. Because they don't like cross the finish line and then collapse.
Right.
They get things across the finish line with the same vitals that they began with. Like, they're not depleted, they're actually energized by the challenge. Their capability is stronger because of it. The organization's capability is stronger because of it.
Well, and I forget the term you use, but there's a universal term for us all finding kind of our unique ability. And our unique ability is, that's what's called a strategic coach term, a guy named Dan Sullivan saying, hey, when I'm doing this type of work, it actually gives me energy. It doesn't take energy away from me. This is what I was sort of built to do.
Yeah. And I call it native genius, but
native genius. There you go.
By a number of names.
Yeah. And so I think when we find that spot for us, it's a happy place for all of us. And it doesn't mean it's the work we're doing is easy. It's just easier for us than it is for lots of other folks. And so as we're talking about these capabilities of the impact player, or these attributes of the impact player, like do the job that's needed, we'll contrast with these solid contributors. So do the job that's needed is what the impact player does. The solid contributor focuses on doing their job, as per their job description, let's say. The impact player will step up, then step back if need be. The solid contributors waiting for direction, which, by the way, that kind of direction is exhausting for the manager or most managers. I don't want to manage somebody. Now, I also can't be managed, but I don't want to manage somebody. I actually want to lead an organization.
And I think that was one of the big insights I got from interviewing 170 managers was managers don't want to manage.
No.
They want to work with people who are self-managing. And that is one of the distillations of impact players, is they are self-managing kinds of contributors, which frees their managers up to really lead. It's kind of like a ticket out of micromanagement for their managers, and for them it's a ticket into leadership and self-management. Like, I don't have to have an oppressive boss.
I think it also ends up being, by the way, it was dawning on me with one client, we were having one-on-ones all Monday and Tuesday. It's also this ticket into being able to relax in a one-on-one and think more strategically about, how do I really help this individual elevate their performance? If I'm not going through ticking and bobbing, I can actually think at the higher level, how do I more effectively coach them? Because I already know they're going to be losing sleep over this project and focused and committed, and they're going to be trying different things. So what are the 2 or 3 things that I could really do to actually enable this person to continue to develop their career or get better and better and better? It takes all the pressure off me.
Well, and it's such a pleasure to lead impact players.
Oh, yeah. Sure it is.
Yeah, it's what, I mean, I've experienced this, like what a joy it is. And that's what I found so many of the managers described leading these people as a privilege. Almost like, I kind of want to be like this person when I grow up. They're these wonderful collaborators.
Yeah.
But I know you were going through this list. We were going to like number 3, which is instead of escalate issues,
Finish stronger.
finish stronger.
Yeah. And again, I'm those of you listening and not watching on our YouTube channel here, I'm just smiling ear to ear, nodding, because really what I'm doing is thinking through two things. Maybe there were times in my career when I was a pretty good impact player, and I'm acknowledging those, but I'm also acknowledging some times in my career where for one reason or another I wasn't an impact player. And maybe I needed at least the formal authority to feel comfortable in and running a room full of a bunch of people and so forth. So I do want to let everybody on this podcast know we're not all born perfect. And there can be a journey to get to this point. But I think understanding some of these things might give all of us, including me, a little more confidence to jump outside our comfort zones sometimes to try and elevate to be that impact player. Number 4, instead of sticking only to what we know best, this was my comment about you at the beginning where I thought it was so courageous. You ask and adjust. Let's talk about that one, Liz.
Yeah, this is what we do when targets are moving. And we
Yeah.
find that the ordinary contributor has a stick-to-itiveness, a persistence, like, let me persist along this course of success. Whereas the impact player is, the way I like to think of it is the visual is they do a day of work, they go to bed, they wake up. And when they wake up to begin work the next day, they assume that while they were sleeping, the world changed. And that they're not going to just pick up where they left off, that it's this sensing mechanism of the world is changing. We need to change. I need to change. How do I gather intel that helps me change? And, I have to admit, Mark, as you were saying about thinking about times that you were an impact player and times where you had maybe fallen or got stuck in this contributor mode.
Yeah.
I went right to one of those times for me at Oracle. And this was, I still have a lot of regret around this. I'm running the training operation for the company. It's a big operation. We've got maybe like 300 people on this team. It's a university and a bunch of other things. It's
huge.
It's a big job for the company. And I was in this meeting with Larry Ellison, Oracle's founder, CEO, and we were going through kind of the training operation, and we were meeting frequently. There's a lot of changes. Larry was one of these visionaries who early on saw, what we could switch a lot of our training to online. And we had already been dabbling in this, and we had great technology and and in this meeting, he's like, Liz, we need to move all of our training online, and we need to reinvent this function. And he says, and I remember this meeting, he looked like straight at me. He goes, Liz, I want you to like fire, get rid of, I can't remember the word, like 250 of your team.
Wow.
He says, you pick your best couple dozen people. And he said, and I want you to rebuild around like a whole new way of learning and teaching and like reinvent this for us. And of course, my jaw hangs open. I'm like, he doesn't really want me to do that. Oh, he's being Larry. He's being a contrarian. He's just wanting to rattle like my thinking to get me to think bigger. The other executives, members of the executive committee were in the room, and they were like, oh, Liz, let's not do this. And so they and I were all in cahoots, and we're like, okay, we have to defend the training function against Larry. And we did this analysis, and I went and talked to all of them. Like, if I cut these things, and because I'm supporting all of the sales training, all of the learning for the whole company. And so our sales leaders are like, don't do this. We need our sales training. We need our sales consulting boot camps. And so we did this big justification. I led the charge, and I went back to Larry, I don't know, a week or two later, and laid out this justification for why we shouldn't do that. Why that was sort of irresponsible and would be disruptive to our business operations, blah, 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 blah. And I remember very much Larry's face. And he looked at me and he's like, wow, you've made a pretty compelling argument. I support that. And we ended up cutting the organization by a much smaller amount. And I felt victorious. And then I do more cutting and then more cutting. And pretty soon I realized, well, Larry was right. I should have just cut this all the way back, like down to root, and let this plant regrow in a healthy way. Now what I'm doing is like cutting off bulbs and cutting off this and,
Mm,
like cutting off limbs of this organization. And it was sort of brutal and torturous. And Larry was in this impact player mode. He was thinking the world is changing. We need to be changing and adjusting it. And I'm like, no, let's stick to what we know. Let's stick to what we know works. And it took me a while to realize he was absolutely right. And I was the one stuck.
mm.
Yeah. And it's not a time I'm proud of, because while it would have been hard initially, I took a lot of people down in terms of like work became like a grind. And you know what it's like when you're in this constant like cutting back mode and now you're trying to
Yeah.
do two people's job. Yeah, I was stuck and he was adjusting.
Well, I think in that case, at least you had the best interest of the company at heart. So you were playing the big game saying, I think the best way to continue to train and so on and so forth is to do it this way. Larry's got a different vision, and you felt you knew it because you were closer to it. I also have one of those kind of regrets in my career, and it's similar. I won't bore everybody with all the details, but I think I stepped away from it because at the core, I just couldn't see the path to success.
Mm,
And then and it was making it about me and my success because I'd been on this kind of roll.
mm.
And there's been this role where we were undefeated, and I just didn't want a loss.
Yeah, you don't want to compromise that.
Didn't want to compromise it. But then now you're clutching the stick too tight. You're doing everything so you don't fail. And of course, that's completely the wrong way to go about any part of life. Just go after the moonshot.
Mm,
Um, Now we'll ask that the last one, the point number 5, make work light. That's what impact players do. So they make work light. We had a nice chat about this before we started, versus contributors who kind of add to the burden. And
mm.
again, this is leaders out there. These folks on your team. You're walking into these meetings. You're not looking forward to it. You have to mentally prepare yourself for that kind of meeting so it doesn't trigger you. Let's talk a little bit about the make work light.
This is one of my favorite practices because I love working with people who make work light. And, you know, think about, when you were in a leadership role, there are colleagues that are taxing, and that this person may be good at what they do, but they come with a tax.
Mm,
Like, oh, I need to get this information from them, but I'm going to walk down to their office and a 2-minute request is going to become a 1-hour discussion. And like it's tiring. It's exhausting to get work done.
yes.
And it might be that they're also create a tax on the team because they foment friction on a team. Maybe
Yes.
they engage in drama and politics. They just make things harder. They add to the phantom workload because
Right.
most of us are juggling two kinds of work. There's the real work, and then there's the phantom workload, the things that make work hard that shouldn't be hard. And these people just take a hard job and make it harder, versus the impact player that just takes hard work and makes it feel lighter. Sometimes they're the kind of people who lend a helping hand. And I can think of times in my life and career where I was just struggling and someone
Mm,
came along and said, "Can I help you with that?" And these people today, like, I almost cry when I think about the lift that they gave me during a really tough time. But they're not people who just go do other people's work. They're people who are just easy to work with.
yeah.
A 2-minute request is a 2-minute request, or maybe even a 1-minute request. They're people who provide a time rebate. They're people who are concise, efficient. They make it easy for you to do your work. They're the kind of people who would forward you a big long chain of email and say, "Oh, by the way, this huge email chain is addressing this issue. Here's the fundamental decision we need to make. I'd love to get your view on this," as opposed to those who say, "What do you think?"
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And they're just a joy to work with.
Yeah,
And they're often people who just bring like a lightness and in some ways they bring like levity
absolutely they do.
to so we can deal with the gravitas of the hard work.
And by the way, that doesn't mean keeping things light doesn't mean we diminish the importance of what's taking place. As part of my background, I used to do mega deals.
Mm,
And so these are hundreds and in some cases $1 billion deals. And when you're negotiating these things after working on them for 18 months, it's fairly tense. We're
mm,
either going to win and we're going to be heroes, or we're all fired. So now that's the game we chose. That's the life we chose. That doesn't mean that we can't keep things a little light or have a little bit of fun. We certainly know when to put our serious cap on. But I think I always use this a metric where these are the folks I was delighted to go out to dinner with,
mm.
or grab a beer with after work, or so on and so on and so forth, and just enjoy the company because they were great players, but they were great to be around as well. I can't believe, Liz, we're almost at the end of the hour. I'm going to let everybody out there know these are two books that are on our kind of top 15 books of all time for business. You have to read these books. So, Impact Players, How to Take the Lead, Play Bigger, and Multiply Your Impact. Everyone listening wants to be an impact player, but it's such an interesting read. I couldn't put this down. I read this in about 6 days. You'll find the same thing, folks. Pick up the book, enjoy it. And if you're leading people, Multipliers is required reading. They should be teaching it at Brigham Young in the MBA program that you graduated from.
They actually have a Multipliers award they give out.
Oh, nice
program.
Yeah, fantastic. Hey, Liz, everybody listening to this podcast, they're going to want to learn more about you and the Wiseman Group and your work. What's the fastest way they can do that?
Well, let's see, thewisemangroup.com, and that will point you to all the books, multipliersbooks.com, impactplayersbook.com. But anyway, you can start at thewisemangroup.com. I'm pretty easy to find on social media, at Liz Wiseman for Twitter. But yeah, you can find me everywhere.
Gang, those links will be in the show notes. And Liz is everywhere for good reason because of these fantastic books. And Liz, thank you so much for keeping this light. I was intimidated a little bit before our call today. I've been following you for so long and listening to you on lots of different things. And boy, it's just such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining the Selling Well podcast.
Well, thank you for a great conversation and for helping people to sell really well. And to deliver value and have impact, which is what I think sales is all about.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Liz. And folks, thank you for listening today. So if you enjoyed what you heard today, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast and tell your friends. And if there's a way we can do this so it's more effective for you, we actually want to know. So I'd encourage you to give your constructive criticism to me directly, Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com. That's my email. I check that. Send it. We love constructive criticism. Let us know what we can do to make this more valuable to you. And we'll look forward to hearing and seeing everybody next time.